All right, I'll call this meeting of the Anchorage Assembly to order. We'll start with a roll call with you, Mr. Gates.
Brett Dyson.
Austin Van Davidson.
Forrest Dunbar.
Dick Trainey. Ira Herman.
Hugh Peterson. Eric Crump.
Chris, are you in the back? Chris Constance just stepped out. Do we have anybody on the phone? Mr. Weddleton? No. If there are people here from the relevant organizations, you guys want to come forward? Are you guys from one of these? If you want to come sit up here, that'd be great. Mr. McQueen Curtis from the Klutna Incorporated, he is on the way. He sent me a text message saying he's running a little late. This is up on Tuesday, and I guess I'll start by just letting Mr. Dyson explain a little bit about the motivation and goals of this ordinance or resolution. Does everybody have a copy of it?
Ready?
Yep. Okay. Go ahead, Mr. Dyson.
Yeah, so our seal, which I think is artistically pleasing, really doesn't, in my view, capture who we are and where we've come from. So it was my intention for us to get some wise people together and think about how more accurately we can reflect the history of this community and area and where we are at right now. And just history is a passion. I don't claim to know much, but the Klutna people have been here for thousands of years, we know, in a very elaborate culture, trading routes and stuff. In the late 1800s, there were miners, trappers, traders, and missionaries here, and so on. And then the mail route by dog sled ran from Seward through our community, and that was an intrinsic part. Hence our dog racing thing here, and then came the railroad. And telling the story of our town doesn't get it if you don't do the road. This town got started because there was a creek you could float barges in with railroad equipment on it at high water, and so that then, and then the huge presence of the military here. This is one of the more strategic bases in the world for the U.S. Department of Defense, and that huge contribution. And then we are the largest municipal area with private aviation, the largest float plane site here, and so on and so forth. So that was my hope, that we could evolve towards a better representation of where we've come from, better representation or picture of what we are, and then if we come up with something that gets approved, then it will be implemented incrementally over a significant period of time at somewhat minimal cost. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Dyson. So let's see here. Yeah, we can start with some comments. I have an amendment that I had drafted that I just want to discuss to put around. And I guess that just to preview it, so I'm a co-sponsor of this. Support what Mr. Dyson is doing. I think there's a misperception in the public that this will lead to us to immediately have to replace everything that has the seal on it, and that is very much not our intention. Just like we did with the Port of Alaska, when it used to be called the Port of Anchorage, we didn't have to repaint anything. We didn't have to change out any vehicles or anything like that. But once things reach the end of their useful life and it's time to replace them, then we will replace something with a new seal. And that's what the amendment sort of wants to stress. Now, of course, this is a resolution that calls together a task force to hopefully develop this new seal. This resolution doesn't actually create that new seal or mandate it. If we get a recommendation back from that task force, we will then have to draw up an ordinance that actually changes the code of Anchorage to adopt this new seal. So this is the first step in kind of what's a three-step process. We pass the resolution calling the task force. The task force does the competition or whatever that's sort of what we ask for here, develops a new seal, and then at the end we have to actually adopt it. The other thing I should say is I've heard some concern from the administration that the police, for example, they were under the impression they had to swap everything out to have legal force. That is not the case, and if the ordinance goes forward, Mr. Gates and I have already talked about how the ordinance will be written in such a way where both the Seal Classic, if you will, and New Seal will both have the same legal force, so that, again, it doesn't mandate us swapping anything out and spending money. But over the course of many years, almost everything that has the old seal will be replaced if we do this. Yeah, Mr. Constant, and then anyone else, and then I'd love to hear from the organizations that have been sort of called out in the resolution.
Yeah, so I was just speaking with Mr. Hess over here, and he noticed that there's maybe one omission or potential omission. As I have a separate one, and I think that it's under the second page, item lines 19 through 28. I think that we really do need an artist to be represented on the commission. So a working artist from the community, somebody who's involved in the arts. And Mr. Hess's comment was, and under the item that's number line 22 there, we might also add, or the Historic Preservation Commission, because we actually have a commission that deals with history in Anchorage. And so those two items are the areas that I'll probably be moving an amendment on this. I'm very supportive of the concept and the process, so thank you.
Can I ask a follow-up question to you, Mr. Hess? So I'm not familiar with what the Historic Preservation Commission does exactly. Are they focused on, preserving old buildings in Anchorage, or is it a broader concept of, as Mr. Dyson alluded to, there are thousands of years of history here from the Eklutna people and other people before there were things sort of built. So I guess, yeah. So I'll ask that question then.
So I was the city's historic preservation officer for 4 or 5 years, and I staffed the commission. And the Anchorage Historic Preservation Commission is the official body charged with developing ordinances and policies regarding historic preservation in Anchorage, which includes preserving buildings, but also other historic elements within the community, and developing potentially wayfinding signs, signage. So I would say they have a very broad charge, and at least 1 or 2 of their seats have to be for a historian.
For what?
For an historian.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Thank you.
There are members of the commission who have a lot of, I know Aaron Leggett has served on the commission. There's also has to be an Alaska Native representative.
Right.
So they have a broad knowledge of history in municipality.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Hess. Mr. Trainee, and then I don't know if Mr. Dyson has any thoughts about this potential amendment.
Chairman, just a couple of things. How much money are you envisioning this costing?
Hopefully, as close to zero as possible.
Okay. So that's the only complaint I've heard from people is we're going to spend money again. I just want to know if we got a dollar limit put on this. An idea for you. The other thing is I think we need to have something that represents the earthquake in '64. Because that was a pivotal time for this town. Most towns die with an earthquake that day. This one came back to life. Much like the American Civil War was rebirth of this country. The earthquake was the rebirth of Anchorage. When you think about what happened to people lived here, that big of a hit, they survived and flourished. So I think you need to have something that represents the earthquake, because it's a historical fact.
Thank you, Mr. Trainee. Mr. Dyson.
Now, just my draft resolution did accomplish what I wanted. That's this discussion. I'm not even sure we need a resolution. I think with the administration's help, so we can go ahead and do this without. But be that as it may, I'm glad to have your paragraph in there to help us assuage some of the criticism. But to me, it's no big deal.
So are there people here from, I'll come back to you, people here from the organizations that that we had called out here? Could you identify yourself for the record, please?
Sure. Steve Halloran, I'm with Visit Anchorage, which is one of the groups called out in Section 2 there. I think we're basically here just to sort of hear the discussion and understand kind of what the goals are and the direction that's going to be established, potentially established. We do have some background and expertise in terms of doing that. We just went through a rebranding about 4 or 5 years ago. And so there's certainly some things to take into consideration regarding that. So we're certainly happy to participate, be part of the group. Basically, Sarah is also with us.
I'm Sarah Maddie. I'm with Visit Anchorage. I've been with Visit Anchorage for 11 years now, and I'm responsible for all the production and all of the collateral development that comes out of the organization, and was very much integral in when ACDB went from Anchorage Convention Visitors Bureau to Visit Anchorage. And just one thought as we talk about cost associated with rebranding and redesigning something of this caliber, I think it's a little bit unrealistic to think that there's going to be a zero cost associated with it. I think that when you're looking to do something at this scale, hiring a firm, a design firm, or a designer of record is what you're going to need to do. A lot of designers in town won't do work on spec work. Like if you were to open it up and say, hi, we're doing a new seal and we'd really like you to submit your designs. Many designers won't do that, but they need to be hired under a contract before they actually will invest time and their own resources to design something for someone. So I think looking at it and taking an approach of we are going to put out a request for proposals or for quotes of what this might realistically cost, and then review those, on, like you said, with a task force, and say, okay, here are all the different responses we've seen, and what is, you know, in our best interest, and what is most cost effective.
Okay, Mr. Peterson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And when I first heard that, that there was a potential for revitalizing the seal, redrawing, and coming up with another one, talking about possibly coming up with another one, I thought that there was going to be a contest among school children or artists in high schools or something along those lines to see what they would come up with. Nothing against the professional artists, and I certainly am not one. When all my friends were doing watercolors, I was still trying to learn how to draw and color within the square, and so I don't know. It's just something that I don't know if that's where Fred, what his idea originally was, but that was sort of what I thought we were going to do. And whatever we do, if we're going to put the railroad on there, when I first looked at it, where it was here, I thought it was a stoplight. And there are people out there that think we are the stoplight capital of the world, and especially if you happen to hit one of those 2-minute lights.
So this is, to be clear, this is not the seal. The seal is only the thing in the center here. This is something that Mr. Dyson brought to our attention that had a, this is for the centennial, right? It's like a special drawing that was done for the centennial. I think that's well taken, Mr. Peterson. And the way this is structured, it sets up a blue ribbon task force that has representatives of all these organizations and members of the assembly, and then they could, in theory, do a competition, or they could hire a designer, or they could do both. Right, so you could take it in a number of different directions. Mr. Dyson?
Sorry. Yeah, just your favorite mayor, Dan Sullivan, tipped me off to this. But I like the concept, and so on. So I would anticipate that the Blue Ribbon Task Force would come up with the components that they believe represents our history and our current culture, and maybe it's pictograms or whatever. And then at some point, and I had suggested, as Mr. Peterson said, that the Anchorage School District have a contest amongst all the students and so on and so forth. But we don't need the artist until we're trying to figure out how to pull all that together and do it. And so I don't have anywhere near the experience with commercial design, but I don't think we need the artist at the get-go at all. So anyways.
Thank you, Mr. Dyson. Mr. Constant?
I see two roles for the artist. One would be the professional entity that kind of pulls everything together, whether it goes through public solicitation in schools or not. That's one thing. But an artist as an advisor in the process is a separate part of the conversation, and very important, I believe. And I think that the way to get the earthquake represented is to amend a whereas clause into the document that just speaks to that specifically, because, you know, there's a chain of history there. Sled dogs, early people, settlers, sled dogs, military, then earthquake would be the next step, you know, if you want it to be explicit.
Yeah, although I do want to be clear, the whereases don't mandate, you know, all these things need to be in the seal, for example. These are just, this is a description of the really just mostly the modern history of Anchorage, right? Because everything we're talking about except for the Kluge people, everything we're talking about is like in the last 100 years, and there are thousands of years before that, you know, Mr. Dyson rightly calls out here, but it's one whereas versus, you know, many more for all the other events that happened in the 20th century or 21st century. Mr. Dyson?
Yeah, so I'm not cynical at all, but I'm hoping the visitor community will, I hope what we produce will help make us an even more attractive place for tourists to come. That gives something of the cultural depth, the natural resources, and the adventure of coming to our town. I'm not sure the earthquake, I want to maintain our
But there'll be
integrity.
another one, don't worry. There'll be another one, don't worry.
Yeah, that's what the tourists, I'm not sure I want to announce that to them.
Get back, Fred.
So another interesting little point here is the flag, and I can't remember, I was speaking with the municipal manager about this, and Mr. Gates can perhaps correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think the flag is actually mandated in our code, right? Or it's sort of...
Right. There was nothing in the code about a flag for this town. Proceeds on flag.
Right, so we sort of took a version of our seal, we took our seal, put it on a yellow background, and called that our flag. If anyone wants to redesign the flag, that is also totally open to being done, because it's not in the code at all right now. So a number of other cities have done that and made more attractive flags as well. Mr. Gates?
In doing a little research for this resolution, I found that many cities have adopted different designs for their flag and their seal, and some of the basic design concepts and principles didn't support a seal with words on it around the edge and so forth to be put on a flag, and that was sort of basis in the cities that I encountered having different designs for the two. I also wanted to mention one of the tasks or purposes of the task force at the top of page 2 the section 1 is to develop guidelines for the improved seal design. I guess those guidelines could say we want you to include, our geologic concise conditions as well in consideration. I guess that's part of the first task. So we need to decide what kind of guidelines should guide the design in the context and so forth.
Is there anyone here from the administration that can speak to this? I don't know. You are here in a different capacity, Mr. Harris?
Yes, Your Honor. I'm just here to listen. I'm not authorized to speak on behalf of the
Okay. Thank you.
You have how many days left, Mr. Harris?
5 business days, not that I'm counting.
You and him share a lot of life.
So if you look at section 3 here, it's going to be staffed either by the clerk's office or the mayor's office. I'm hopeful that we can bring the mayor's office and staffers into this and work with them. We have until March 31st to do what Mr. Gates suggests. If this passes, that will be the time frame the task force has. Other conversation about this resolution?
If there's no one else, I'll briefly say the conversations that I hear from the public often, there's this very strange phenomenon that I'm starting to see in a number of different policy areas where, I don't know, you have some names for these individuals, but there are certain people who are always against everything that we're doing.
This is against virtually everything.
Right.
Hate people.
And their arguments tend toward, well, you haven't solved crime, so you shouldn't do this. Or you haven't solved homelessness, so you shouldn't do that. And I just would say here to everyone in the room, for the record, that that's absurd, and that we are a very high-functioning group We have a whole city government, there's a $500 million budget and a 3,000 member corporation working, and we can multitask. And I look forward to seeing this work done.
Thank you, Mr. Constant. I share those sentiments. I feel sometimes that we get comments that imply that the municipality cannot walk and chew gum at the same time. Now, it is true that sometimes we have limited staff time and certain things fall through the cracks, but in general, we do a lot of tasks. It's also funny when it's a task that's really important to that person,
Right.
then that argument kind of goes out the window. But yeah. Any other commentary? This will be one of the first things you get to vote on, Ms. Quinn Davidson. So look forward to that. And if there's nothing else, then I was hoping that Mr. McQueen would be able to join us.
Separate issue for us.
What's that?
Separate issue.
Oh,
Work session Monday. That you might want to tell everybody.
Sure. Oh, I should know for the record, Mr. Wellton's on the phone. He sent me a message. Perhaps he's not able to
I told
speak.
Suzanne about the work session I talked to her last night, so she knows about it.
Okay, great. Yeah, so there will be a work session on Monday regarding Canabasca. I will not be able to chair it, but we will be having one. Any closing thoughts, Mr. Dyson?
What's the work session on?
It's on a particular marijuana license that has some issues.
Yeah, so people, Mr. Constant, when people are, I was going to say bitching, complaining about.
Strike that from the
where we
record.
spend our time, you know, tell them we spend more than half of it on the darn marijuana issues. You know, and yeah. It disappoints me, some of the discussion that come up. And some of it that I've heard is blatantly racist.
Yes.
And we can argue sometime whose end of the political spectrum is the screwiest. Mr. Croft and I have been having that discussion for 20 years, but it's discouraging. But what we're doing here helps. Yeah, thanks. I appreciate y'all's interest.
There's
Oh, there's. Okay, great. Just in time, Mr. McQueen.
Come
No,
here.
it's fine. Why don't you come speak a little bit? I'm sorry to put you on the spot. I think this wasn't as controversial as we were expecting, so there wasn't so much pushback. So we almost finished the work session. But I'll introduce for the record Mr. Curtis McQueen from the Clutna Corporation, and yeah, if you don't mind just saying if your organization is willing and able to participate in this, and what opportunities you might see from it.
Well, thank you. I apologize for being late, but yeah, we're very excited. We never saw kind of this concept coming until I got to sit at a meeting maybe about 6 weeks ago, a month ago. Had a board meeting, and the pride and the honor of just participating in the conversation of where kind of recognizing where Anchorage is today and maybe in its seal has us pretty excited. Wherever this goes, we wanted to make sure that we contributed all of our energy. We have some elders if it ever got to a place where we have resources of people that can participate. And I know Aaron Leggett on our tribal site, Aaron represents NVE. They're pretty excited about it. Aaron's been doing a lot of travel.
NVE means?
Native Village of Eklutna. So the Native Village of Eklutna and Eklutna Inc., we don't see ourselves as separate organizations, even though one's a tribe and one's an ANC. Most people have gotten to know that we work pretty close as one unified people. So from a social, from a cultural, from an economic side, we actually think Anchorage is all that, right? And so we're a united group, and whatever we can do to participate and whatever we can bring to the table, we're excited.
Mr. Dyson.
Yeah, and I met Curtis, but really started getting close to some of the group of people when Alaska Native Heritage Center was coming up. And that was contested. And we literally had people saying, we don't want any of those kind of people in our neighborhood. And I just about jumped over that table, which then I was able to do. But there's a major attraction, you know, and if talking about attracting tourists, what they have out there, and that whole part of our heritage, I think this makes us a significantly more interesting place for people to come. And the Heritage Center is a darn good educational thing. Pardon me, I'm editorializing.
No, I very much share those sentiments, and we're honored to have the Heritage Center in East Anchorage, although technically it's outside of our district, but you can only get there by driving through our district. So, Mr. Constant?
Yeah, Mr. McQueen, you walked in just after a couple of comments that were germane, and that was the discussion about the public discourse that has kind of started percolating outside of policy-making bodies and in communities where there's not so much respect. And so what I would offer is that we all see, or many of us see, the kind of the dark side of any of these conversations, and I think most of us are happy to lead right through that and get to a good place.
Well, I would tell you, we have built a presentation when people come to Eklutna now, and I get a hard time on how many pictures are in our PowerPoint. But what it does is it touches on our culture, it touches on our history, and it really celebrates Anchorage. And what it does is we use the word balance. It shows how much the native people of Anchorage, the Eklutna people, have contributed to infrastructure. And so we know we've got to feed the economy, but we've also got to celebrate what we have here, right? And the live, work, play, all the stuff that makes Anchorage so special. So we're very proud to be part of anything that has that kind of conversation.
Thank you, Mr. McQueen. Mr. Trainey?
When I take a look at where our water comes from, it's your area. When I take a look at the fact corporation has given us land for schools for like $1 a year at no cost.
And parks and ballparks.
When I take a look at all the land you have for the development of Anchorage, it's not going to happen here, it's going to happen in your area. That's the administration works with you to get water lines and sewer lines, but that's another issue. But they are the future of what we'd like to call Anchorage. It's there. So we very much need to have them involved in this.
Yeah, our area has a strange, wonderful relationship with Anchorage.
We got stuff.
We send them the best water available anywhere, and you guys send us garbage and sex offenders.
Put it plainly.
Oh, my God.
But Fred, at one time we had our own borough there, remember?
Darn
For a
straight.
short period of time, we had our own.
Well, just kind of, this has been a really special year for us in projects. On one hand, we've always supported the utility infrastructure, but we were able to take down a dam built in 1929 that was a block. And on one end of the river, on the other end, just 2 blocks up, we just built the new Ernie Turner Center. And on the inside of that building, where it's going to be a healing building, it's got the theme of rivers running through it. So the way you walk on the floor. So we've started to take what the Eklutna River means, and yet what Anchorage is needing, and we too as Alaska Natives have had a lot of drug and alcohol abuse. We were the first ones to say, we're not in our backyard. We're going to prove to everybody, we're going to put a facility in our backyard. We're going to put whatever. And so I'm really proud to be part of who the Eklutna people are, and they are a can-do group. They really are. And again, just to be part of this conversation, any conversation with the Assembly is exciting. Well, from my, I'm not going
So
to.
you probably get arguments from people about that.
Yeah.
It can go a little long.
Yeah, but perhaps not this one. Any final thoughts or questions? All right, with that, Mr. Peterson.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to thank you and your organization for stepping up, and seeing the need and being willing to maybe face a little questioning and controversy and moving forward through it and doing the right thing. It could be argued that you're doing the right thing, certainly. So
There's a flip side of that, because in my view, the Eklutna people suffered very significantly with the migration of non-native people. Destroyed the salmon runs in the river, mined tens of thousands of yards of gravel and destroyed spawning grounds, treated the ravine of the river there like a city dump, and were actively nasty in lots of ways to these people. And how they got to where they're at now without being angry and resentful is beyond me. But hats off to them. And I can tell you in our area, the best of citizens. In schools, ballparks, and all kinds of stuff these folks contributed, I'd still be, I was going to say pissed, I'd still be angry.
Mr. Trainee was in the queue.
Mr. McQueen, could you get with our chairman and tell us what's happening with that, the land you've got for development? I know you had a problem with water and sewer. I'd like for the assembly to be briefed on what's going on, see how we can make sure that happens. Because they see so many people driving every day up the valley when they should be coming to that part of Anchorage and living there. So we've got to make sure your land gets developed in this. We need to bring the assembly into this to make sure that the land and the water infrastructure is done correctly.
Well, I appreciate that. For every study that the city has commissioned for the last 20 years on land, they've always come out to Akluna and asked if we would participate in that study and would we make land available. And we are, but we need, the infrastructure needs to be there to do that. We're having productive conversations with the mayor right now, but I would gladly.
If you'd work with the chairman, because I want the assembly brought into this.
Sure.
But this administration, with a little coercion, has been fairly cooperative, and we're on track for that to happen.
I know that, but we saw
I
the
hope
same
so.
thing
We
with the
included it on
methane.
track.
Right.
With the methane, Fred, we had to work with administrations very vigorously to get them to come on board. And we got that resolved. I want to make sure we get this segment done, because we don't need to be losing people that should be living here, the Matsu Valley. They've got land there.
Thank you, Mr. Trainee. Mr. Constant?
Thank you. Mr. McQueen, you mentioned the Ernie Turner Center there. Now, were you an active partner in that?
So we were. As a matter of fact, I'll tell you where, and I want to give Siri some credit in that. About 8 years ago, the Cook Inlet region realized that if we could 4 times a year bring all the corporations within the Siri region, all the tribes, all the nonprofits into one room and kind of celebrate who we are, talk about how synergistically we could make some changes. So economic conversations happen, land use. Well, one of them was certainly a lot of our families were feeling the drug and alcohol abuse situation. Kim Zello, one of our board members, shared very courageously, shared her personal story about her daughter. And Gloria O'Neill was in the room. And when Gloria was in the room, she said, you know, we may need a new place for a new future Ernie Turner Center. And I engaged with Gloria and I said, well, what if they were in a serene environment? What if folks were in a wooded area? They can't just walk out to a busy street. They can't have all these distractions when they're going through a struggle or trying to rehabilitate. What if we put them in nature? We at Akluna would be willing to step up and show you guys some of that. And so we gave her a tour, and she fell in love with the piece of property up Akluna Lake Road. And that started the conversation. And then we came in as a design team, so we helped design the building. We came in as a contractor, we built the building, and we delivered a really cost-effective facility that is gorgeous. The other thing we did is we subdivided a couple lots next to it, that if that is successful, because you can only have 16 beds, and I'm not an expert in 16 beds under one roof, but we know there's going to be a bigger need. So we actually subdivided the property so that if that becomes successful, we could do another and another. And we had grand opening, a few folks, it was beautiful, it's a beautiful facility.
So that actually gets to my question. Somehow, we weren't generally invited to your grand opening. So I'm hoping that you guys could provide us with a notice tour that we could come out.
That would be, I tell you what, I will get a hold. We took a step back because it was a CITC driven.
I get it.
At the same time, I think Gloria and her team would absolutely enjoy giving the assembly a tour of that site, and I think that's warranted, and I will ping her on that.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Thompson. Okay, with that, we're going to end this work session.